Lisa Leslie is one of the greatest legends in the history of American women's basketball, with a career defined by a series of iconic achievements that changed the entire sport. She was the first to perform a dunk in an official WNBA game, a moment that broke the seemingly impossible boundaries of women's basketball and changed the way the world viewed the physical strength of female athletes. In the colors of the Los Angeles Sparks, she won 2 WNBA championships, 3 league MVP titles, multiple All-Star selections, and became the face representing an entire era of the league. At the international level, Lisa Leslie won 4 Olympic gold medals with the United States women's basketball team, contributing to building the period of absolute dominance of American women's basketball on the world stage. She was also one of the most influential players in NCAA during her time playing at USC, where she was honored as Naismith College Player of the Year multiple times and became a symbol of women's college basketball. In 2015, she was officially inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, affirming her immortal status in sports history. However, behind that spotlight was a journey full of pressure and quiet sacrifice. Lisa Leslie had to grow up in an environment with many limitations, where every dream required many times more effort to survive. She not only competed against opponents on the court, but also had to fight against enormous expectations from society, where women of color in sports were always held to stricter standards. Every success came with trade-offs in time, health, and even personal life moments left behind. Nevertheless, Lisa never collapsed, because within her there always existed a persistent will forged from a difficult childhood, a belief that every run on the basketball court was not just competition, but a way to prove that limits were not fixed, but something that could be broken by discipline and perseverance. Before moving on to the next part of the journey, please hit subscribe and leave a like. That is a small way to honor the journey of a person who turned adversity into strength and never gave in to fate. Lisa Leslie continued into her childhood years in Compton, in a reality that became increasingly clear about the harshness and limitations of the living environment, where every passing day was tied to choices that were not very easy, and silent pressures that a child could hardly name. After the initial foundation of discipline was formed from a working family and her mother's strictness, she began to feel more deeply the economic instability around her, where everything was always just enough to survive, but not enough to dream comfortably. Life in the neighborhood did not allow slowing down or hesitation, forcing Lisa to learn to adapt early, to understand that to move forward, she had to create her own path instead of waiting for a door to open from the outside. In that context, basketball was not simply a physical activity, but gradually became the center of life, the only place where she felt clarity about goals and control in a world full of factors beyond her reach. While other children could experience childhood with many natural social activities, Lisa spent most of her time on the basketball court, where shots, runs, and long practices became a more familiar rhythm than ordinary childhood games. In the process, she gradually realized the clear absence of female role models in sports right in her own community, which made the path she was on feel more lonely. Without many existing milestones to reflect on or guide her, that very absence did not make her falter, but it created a state of self-shaping where Lisa was forced to observe, learn, and build belief in her own abilities without relying on confirmation from those who came before. As she became more attached to basketball, she trained herself with strict personal discipline, setting her own limits and goals without any external motivation, turning practice into an inseparable part of daily life. However, that near absolute focus also created a slight distance between her and children her age, when they could experience more natural social relationships. While Lisa gradually narrowed her world to the basketball court, to progress, and to the long-term goals she pursued, that isolation did not come suddenly or intensely, but formed quietly over time, like a light shadow following each step of growth, making her sometimes clearly feel that she was walking on a different path, a path that required more sacrifice than what an ordinary child had to face. On those hot afternoons in Compton, when the concrete court surface became scorching under each step, Lisa still quietly practiced, not because of external pressure, but because of a vague but persistent belief that basketball could be the only way out of the limitations of her current living environment. Every time she threw the ball into the air, it was not just a technical action, but also a way for her to affirm her existence in a world that did not easily accept the big dreams of a young girl. Over time, that persistence gradually became her nature, transforming Lisa from a child with physical talent into an individual carrying discipline and will far beyond her age. Even though she was still part of the Compton community, she began to exist as a separate entity within that environment, both belonging to it and gradually separating from it through the path she chose. In the silence of the growing process, there were no explosive moments or sudden changes, but only the daily accumulation of effort, of sweat, and of practices no one witnessed, all gradually creating a solid foundation for the future that even she herself could not fully see at that time. Lisa Leslie entered high school with a clear change in the way she was perceived by those around her, when her quiet practices on the basketball courts of Compton gradually began to create undeniable marks in the school sports environment. No longer just a tall girl with a passion for basketball, Lisa began to appear as a standout factor in local competitions, where her skills, physicality, and persistence quickly attracted the attention of coaches and school sports followers. Every game was not simply a contest, but gradually became a place where she affirmed her presence, where every movement, every rebound, and every scoring play reflected the non-stop training behind it. When the first successes appeared, the time Lisa spent on the basketball court increased more and more, bringing with it a gradual narrowing of normal teenage activities. When hanging out with friends or simple social experiences were gradually replaced by dense practice schedules and important games, she began to live in a different rhythm from her peers, where each day was measured by progress, by performance, and by the ability to maintain stable form under increasing pressure. Coaches quickly recognized in Lisa not only superior physicality, but also a serious competitive spirit, high concentration, and a calmness rarely seen at her age, which made her an indispensable factor in the lineup. However, along with that recognition came increasing pressure as Lisa began to understand that every time she stepped on the court, she represented not only herself, but also the expectations of the team, the coaches, and gradually the entire community that was beginning to place faith in her. The pressure to maintain high performance in every game became a familiar part of her life, making every small mistake feel heavier than usual, and every victory came with the requirement to continue maintaining perfection in the next performance. In the process, Lisa gradually formed a feeling of maturing earlier than her peers, when conversations, interests, and ordinary youth experiences no longer occupied the central position in her life. Instead, she began to view everything through the lens of athletic development, of responsibility, and of the long-term goals she was pursuing. Her reputation in high school basketball began to form naturally, not from seeking spotlight, but from the stability in her form and the ability to make a difference in every game. However, that reputation also brought a new form of pressure, as Lisa realized that the more attention she received, the greater the expectations for her, and every step forward came with the risk of being judged if she did not maintain stability. In these years, she did not experience loud incidents or any collapses, but instead, a process of accumulating silent pressure, where development always came with trade-offs in time, freedom, and even ordinary youth experiences. Lisa began to understand that the path she was on was not only the path of talent, but also the path of sacrifice, where every achievement was built on the foundation of long training hours and choices different from the majority. In that growth, she did not lose herself, but gradually shaped a version of herself with higher discipline, more focus, and less distraction from external factors. It was the combination of natural talent and non-stop training that brought Lisa Leslie closer to the door of greater opportunities, while also placing an increasingly heavy responsibility on her shoulders, as people began to see her not only as a promising young player, but as a name that could change the landscape of women's basketball in the future. Lisa Leslie entered USC as an inevitable turning point in her journey, where everything built from high school basketball began to be tested at a completely different level, harsher, faster, and demanding more both physically and mentally. From the very first days wearing the USC uniform, she quickly became an important pillar of the team, not in the role of a young player needing time to adapt, but as a factor expected to create immediate impact. Her presence on the court was no longer a developing potential, but a new standard that the team relied on to shape its playing style. In the NCAA environment, where the intensity of competition was much higher than at the school level, every play happened faster, stronger, and required absolute precision. Lisa had to constantly adapt to maintain her position among opponents who were also full of talent and hunger. Pressure from coaches was not only about winning, but also about her maintaining stability in every game, because any decline could directly affect the whole team. Teammates looked to her as an anchor, someone who could keep the rhythm of the game and make a difference in important moments, which made Lisa no longer play just for herself, but also carry the expectations of the entire collective on her shoulders. Parallel to the pressure on the court was the increasing attention from the media, as her name began to appear more frequently in articles about NCAA women's basketball, turning every game not only into a sports competition, but also a performance that was widely followed and evaluated. In that context, every game became a continuous test of the ability to handle pressure, where Lisa had to maintain the reputation built from the school level and prove that she was not just a temporary phenomenon. However, what made this period heavier was not only playing pressure, but also the combination of sports and academics, as Lisa had to balance a dense competition schedule, long practices, and academic responsibilities at a prestigious university environment. Her days began to be divided between classrooms, training rooms, and competition courts, creating a rhythm of life with almost no real breaks, where body and mind were always in a state of continuous activity. As time passed, fatigue began to accumulate quietly, not from any specific event, but from the non-stop repetition of high intensity, of expectations, and of responsibility. The long practices, tense games, and invisible pressures gradually created a burden that Lisa had to learn to carry as an inevitable part of the growth journey. Even though she still maintained impressive form and continued to affirm her position on the team, she began to feel more clearly that the path she was on was not only the path of glory, but also a process that required continuous trade-offs between strength, time, and personal peace. In that non-stop development, Lisa did not collapse, but she no longer simply experienced basketball as pure joy, but instead as a serious journey, where every step forward came with a price to pay, and every success was built on the foundation of quiet sacrifice that few could see from the outside. Lisa Leslie entered a new phase of her life when she was selected for the United States women's basketball team, a milestone that not only marked recognition at the highest level of domestic sports, but also opened up a completely different competition space, where every limit was raised and every mistake carried much greater weight than before. Wearing the national team uniform was not simply an honor, but the beginning of a new pressure, as she no longer competed for a university or a local team, but represented an entire nation on the international stage. In this environment, every play not only reflected personal skill, but was also tied to the image of American women's basketball in the eyes of the world, making every action on the court scrutinized more carefully than ever. The pressure of representing the nation forced Lisa to enter a state of competition, where focus and responsibility became vital factors, because any mistake could become the center of attention and evaluation from international media. The training and competition schedule of the national team was continuous and long, requiring her to maintain near-perfect physical condition for extended periods, while adapting to different tactical systems when facing teams from various basketball backgrounds around the world. The constant changes in competition environment, opponents, and tactical requirements kept Lisa's body and mind in a state of constant adjustment, with little time to rest or fully recover between tournaments. In the process, she gradually became one of the most representative faces of American women's basketball, not only for her superior playing skills, but also for her stability and ability to handle pressure in important moments. Lisa Leslie's image began to go beyond the scope of a simple athlete, as she was seen as a symbol of strength, discipline, and resilience in American women's sports. However, along with that recognition came an even greater responsibility, as she not only had to maintain her personal form, but also contribute to maintaining the dominant position of the national team on the international stage. Every time she stepped on the court, Lisa carried the expectations of millions of fans, of the coaches, and of an entire sports system that had placed faith in athletes of her generation. That responsibility went far beyond the ordinary role of a player, turning every game into a test of character, of the ability to endure pressure, and of stability in the most important moments. In that context, Lisa had to learn to balance maintaining peak performance with facing increasingly strict requirements from the international environment, where every small detail could affect the overall result. Even though she continued to achieve important successes with the team, she also began to feel more clearly the invisible burden that came with fame, as her presence on the court was not only a symbol of talent, but also a representative for an entire generation of women's basketball trying to assert its position on the world's sports map. Lisa Leslie entered the most pivotal phase of her career when the WNBA officially came into existence, and she became one of the first faces to shape the identity of the league right from its early days that were still full of experimentation and instability. When joining the Los Angeles Sparks, Lisa was not simply a professional player stepping onto a new court, but also a part of a historic project trying to prove that women's basketball could exist as a top-level sports product in the United States. In that context, everything was not yet complete, from facilities and media to the level of public interest, forcing players to compete in conditions unlike any professional league that had existed before. Lisa had to adapt to an environment where she was both an athlete and a person contributing to building the image for an entire newly forming league, where every game carried not only competitive meaning, but also a test for the future of the WNBA. This pressure came not only from the court, but also from her invisible role in helping women's basketball gain wider recognition, as the media and the public were still observing whether this league could maintain long-term appeal or not. Every game of Lisa became part of the process of shaping social perception about women's sports, making her compete not only against opponents but also against the expectations of an entire system in its building phase. The dense competition schedule and extremely high physical demands constantly pushed her body to the limit, as the limited rest time between games was not enough for complete recovery, forcing her to maintain stable form through a prolonged chain of pressure. In this period, Lisa began to be seen not only as an outstanding player, but also as a symbol representing the development of modern women's basketball, where she served as a bridge between the generation of school athletes and a professional league that was forming. However, along with that recognition came an increasingly strong sense of responsibility, as she understood that every step she took could influence how the public evaluated the entire league. That made Lisa maintain an almost absolute level of focus and discipline, while still adapting to continuous changes in tactics, opponents, and media expectations. Even though she continued to compete with high form and made important contributions to the early development of the WNBA, she also began to feel more clearly the accumulated fatigue from the prolonged intensity of competition, not as a decline, but as a natural price of both competing at the highest level and building a new foundation for an entire league. In all of that, Lisa Leslie gradually became an inseparable image from WNBA history, a person who not only played basketball but also created a new era for women's sports in the United States along with it. Lisa Leslie entered a pivotal phase in her career when the moment she performed a dunk in the WNBA became one of the most iconic images in the entire history of women's basketball, a moment that not only caused a shock domestically, but also spread globally, making international media immediately pay attention to something that many had previously considered almost impossible in professional women's basketball. When competing in the colors of the Los Angeles Sparks, Lisa was not simply playing basketball, but was unintentionally becoming the center of a change in perception about the physical limits of women in sports. As that dunk broke an invisible boundary that had existed for many decades, from that point on, her name was no longer mentioned only within the league's scope, but began to appear on international media outlets as a symbol of breaking limits, which made the pressure on her shoulders increase markedly, because every subsequent action was placed under the light of comparison with that historic moment. Lisa began to live with an image that the world created for her, the image of a limit-breaking symbol, and that made every game no longer simply competition, but a process of maintaining public expectations. While fame grew quickly and strongly, the requirement to perform continuously also became stricter, as people not only wanted to see her succeed, but also wanted to see her repeat the extraordinary moments she had created. This created a special form of pressure, where success was no longer the destination, but became the minimum standard that needed to be maintained. Lisa's body also began to adapt to increasingly high competition intensity, as the dense schedule of the WNBA and the national team left her with almost no real time to rest and fully recover. Small collisions and body impacts during competition began to accumulate over time, not creating a big incident immediately, but gradually forming a quiet foundation of fatigue that only those involved could clearly feel. Meanwhile, the expanding fame did not allow her to slow down, because the more she became a symbol, the more Lisa had to appear, compete more, and prove her value in every moment on the court. Fame was no longer simply recognition, but became a continuous loop of demands, where each success led to higher expectations, and each expectation demanded a greater level of performance. In the process, Lisa Leslie did not lose her stability or competitive spirit, but she began to live in a state where the boundary between glory and pressure became blurred, when the same moment could be both an honor and an increase in burden. It was from this phase that her image was no longer just an outstanding athlete, but became a living symbol of breaking limits in modern women's basketball, a person who was both honored for breaking standards and had to carry the responsibility of maintaining the very new standard she had created. Lisa Leslie moved into a phase where everything in her career no longer revolved only around the story of one league or one team, but expanded to the stature of an entire nation, as she continuously participated in multiple Olympic Games with the United States women's basketball team, where the pressure no longer came from domestic audiences, but from the whole world watching every step of the team. In the national team uniform, every game became part of a global competition, where the strongest basketball nations faced each other directly, and every mistake could change the landscape of an entire tournament. Lisa was no longer competing in the familiar WNBA environment, but stepping into a space where speed, tactics, and intensity were all raised to a completely different level, forcing her to constantly adapt to maintain her position in the starting lineup. Keeping a spot on the national team was never guaranteed, even for an experienced player like Lisa, because every training camp was a fiercely competitive internal process, where every athlete had to prove their value once again. That pressure was not only in the professional aspect, but also came from the responsibility of representing the image of American women's sports on the international stage, when the team was not only seen as a competing collective, but also as a symbol of dominance and standards in American women's basketball. Lisa became one of the most familiar faces of that image, which forced her to face the expectation that every appearance had to demonstrate stability, character, and the ability to lead in important moments. Over many years, the competition and training schedule of the national team was continuous, interspersed between international tournaments and tense preparation periods, leaving the bodies and minds of the athletes with almost no real long breaks. Lisa had to learn to maintain peak competition state in a non-stop repeating cycle, where the end of each tournament opened a new preparation process, and each victory brought greater expectations for the next. In that environment, her mental responsibility became increasingly heavy, because wearing the national team uniform was not only about competing, but also about preserving the honor and position of American women's basketball in the eyes of the world. Lisa understood that she represented not only herself or her teammates, but also a sports system that had invested, developed, and placed faith in its generation of athletes, which made every game a test not only of skills but also of mental character. The repetition of this pressure over many years created an invisible burden when responsibility was no longer something that happened in specific moments but became a prolonged state of existence throughout her international career. Even though she still maintained stable form and played an important role in the American team's victories, Lisa gradually felt more clearly the quiet drain on her body and mind, not from a big event, but from the long days of non-stop competing, non-stop traveling, and non-stop having to maintain the image of a national symbol. It was in this phase that she was not only a top-level competing athlete, but also a part of American sports identity on a global scale, where every action carried meaning beyond the basketball court, and every success was tied to the responsibility of maintaining the position of an entire women's sports system that had been built over many generations. After all the years competing at the Olympic level, Lisa Leslie not only became an outstanding athlete, but gradually was placed in a position of greater symbolic significance than herself, as society began to see her as a representative model of black women in American sports. In the eyes of the public, she was no longer simply a basketball player, but the embodiment of strength, resilience, and the ability to overcome all limits, an image expected to always stand firm in every situation. This recognition, instead of just bringing pride, opened up another more subtle form of pressure, when Lisa had to live in a state of always being expected to be strong, stable, and not allowed to show weakness in public. Every appearance, whether on the court or in life, she was viewed through the lens of a symbol, where every personal emotion could easily be interpreted as a message representing an entire community. That made Lisa gradually have to learn to control her image more tightly, not only in competition, but also in the way she appeared before the media and the public, because any sign of fatigue or wavering could be magnified into a story bigger than itself. The constant pressure to maintain a positive image kept her entering a state where privacy and personal emotions were gradually narrowed, when what the world saw no longer fully reflected the true person inside. Lisa began to realize that she was not only honored for her achievements, but also placed in the position of a standard, a measure for future generations of athletes, which made every action of hers carry symbolic meaning rather than just personal meaning. The gap between her true self and her public image therefore became increasingly clear when what she experienced inside could not always be fully and authentically expressed outside. While the public saw an athlete who was always stable, always strong, and always in control of everything, behind that was a person who had to constantly balance between the responsibility of representation and the very normal emotional needs of an individual. The unending societal expectations made Lisa gradually live in a space where weakness was not something that could be shared publicly, but became a part that had to be kept to herself. This created a special kind of isolation, not because she was separated from the collective, but because she was placed in a position where very few people could see the entire true person behind the fame. Even though she continued to compete and maintain a positive image throughout her career, Lisa began to understand that the price of becoming a symbol lay not only in the pressure of competition, but also in having to constantly represent the values that others assigned to her. In that fragile balance, she did not lose herself, but gradually had to learn to live with two versions existing in parallel. One was the athlete seen by the public, and the other was the true person with limitations, emotions, and fatigue that were not always allowed to be shown outside. After many years living in the spotlight of fame, a packed competition schedule, and the constant pressures from her symbolic role, Lisa Leslie began to step into a different phase of her life, where basketball was no longer the sole center, but gradually gave way to deeper personal life values, such as family, stability, and the role of being a mother. In that journey, she got married and built her own home, a space where she was no longer seen as a sports symbol, but simply a woman with everyday responsibilities, private emotions, and priorities outside the basketball court. The role of being a mother brought Lisa a completely new perspective on life, when instead of focusing on victories or achievements, she had to learn to balance taking care of her children, maintaining the family, and continuing her career in a less pressured form. The years of peak competition gradually receded into the background, not through a sudden ending, but through a natural transition process, when she gradually reduced her appearances in major competitions to spend more time on her personal life. This change did not diminish Lisa's status in sports, but it marked an important shift in the way she defined herself, from an athlete who always had to meet public expectations to an individual who was finding balance again after many years of living under constant pressure. When she no longer had to compete at the highest intensity, Lisa began to shift toward media activities, where she remained connected to basketball but in the role of an observer, analyst, and sharer of experience rather than directly competing on the court. Her work as a commentator and media representative helped her maintain a connection with the sport that had shaped her life, but at the same time allowed her to have a more stable pace of life, less dominated by the competition schedule and harsh physical pressure as before. In this period, Lisa began to find again a normal rhythm of life that she had somewhat lost during her peak years, when time was no longer divided into small pieces by training and competing, but could be devoted to family, to herself, and to simpler experiences of life. However, the transition from a top athlete to a new role was not a simple change, because it came with the process of readjusting her personal identity, when she had to learn to exist without relying on the familiar rhythm of professional competition. Nevertheless, Lisa still maintained a strong connection with women's basketball, not as someone creating historic moments on the court, but as someone contributing to nurturing the next generation through her experience, knowledge, and influence. Life off the court brought her a different feeling, where pressure was no longer immediate and continuous, but was replaced by relative stability, allowing her to look back on her entire journey with a deeper perspective. In that transition, Lisa did not lose her identity, but gradually redefined it in a new context, where value lay not only in competitive achievements, but also in the ability to balance career, family, and self after many years of living in a harsh, competitive environment. Throughout the years of peak competition spanning many seasons, Lisa Leslie not only faced the pressure of fame and societal expectations, but also had to endure a much more silent, yet persistent burden, the wear and tear of her own body. The injuries did not come in a single moment, but accumulated gradually through each game, each landing, each strong collision in the harsh professional competitive environment. Although always known for her superior physique and ability to control the area under the basket, Lisa could not escape the natural law of elite sports, where the human body pays the price for the continuous repetition of extreme physical exertion. Through each season, the small pains began to appear more frequently, sometimes not big enough to make her stop, but enough to remind her that the body was gradually being worn down by time and non-stop competitive pressure. While still having to maintain the highest level of stable performance, Lisa was forced to learn to compete with the increasingly clear limits of her body, which made each game not only a competition of skills, but also a test of endurance. The prolonged physical pressure over many years of professional competition made the recovery process between seasons shorter and less effective. When the body no longer had enough time to return to its previous full state, the breaks that seemed sufficient to regenerate energy, in fact, became periods of continued preparation for the next competition cycle, making recovery an incomplete part of the entire career journey. Lisa gradually realized that her career was not only shaped by successes on the court, but also by the ability to adapt to the natural decline of the body over time, a reality that every elite athlete has to face. But not everyone can accept easily. The high intensity of competition sustained over many years left impacts that could not be seen immediately, but gradually affected mobility, recovery speed, and overall physical stability, making every movement on the court carry the traces of time. However, Lisa never let these limits define her career, but instead learned to adjust her playing style, control the pace of competition, and optimize her energy to continue maintaining her position in the lineup at the highest level. When stepping into the final phase of her career, she began to make more proactive decisions in managing her health, no longer putting competition above all as before, but instead prioritizing the long-term sustainability of her body and life after basketball. After stepping away from professional competition, Lisa continued to maintain attention to her physical health, no longer in the role of an athlete competing continuously, but as a person who understood the value of the body after many years of enduring harsh intensity. This process helped her look back on her entire career, not only as a journey of glory, but also as a long process of physical sacrifice, where every achievement was tied to the limits the body had to overcome, and every step forward left indelible traces of time and professional competitive intensity. When Lisa Leslie officially left the court after a career spanning many years at the peak, it was not a sudden ending moment, but a gradual transition between two states of existence. One side was the athlete always living under the pressure of competition and public expectations, and the other side was the person stepping out of the spotlight to find herself again in a completely new role. Stepping away from the basketball court did not mean completely cutting ties with the sport that had shaped her entire life, because basketball continued to be central in her new journey, but in a different way, gentler and more observational than direct competition. With no more packed competition schedule or harsh training sessions, Lisa began to adapt to a new rhythm of life, where time was no longer divided into small pieces by competitive pressure, but was expanded for opportunities to reflect, analyze, and contribute in a different way to the sports community. The shift to the role of commentator and sports ambassador marked an important turning point in the process of reshaping her personal identity. When Lisa was no longer primarily seen as a competing athlete, but as someone capable of conveying the experience, perspective, and values of women's basketball to a broader public, in this new role, she still maintained a deep connection with the sport that had been part of her entire life. But instead of creating moments on the court, she contributed to analyzing, explaining, and clarifying the hidden values behind each game, helping audiences understand more deeply about professional women's basketball. The process of adapting to the new identity was not always easy, because after many years of living in the central role of everyone's attention on the court, stepping into an observational position required Lisa to adjust the way she perceived herself and her value in the sports ecosystem. However, her deep understanding of basketball helped her quickly find her place in the sports media field, where her playing experience became the foundation for her to continue contributing in a different but no less important way. Alongside media work, Lisa continued to participate in women's basketball development activities, especially programs aimed at the younger generation, where she could directly share experience and inspire future athletes stepping onto the path she had once taken. The role of sports ambassador helped her maintain a strong connection with the basketball community, not only at the professional level, but also in grassroots development programs, where the value of sports was expanded beyond the scope of elite competition. In this period, Lisa Leslie was no longer defined by minutes played or points scored, but by her long-term influence on the development of women's basketball and the new generations of athletes. Maintaining a close connection with the sports community helped her not fall into a state of isolation after retirement, but instead continue to play a role as a bridge between her past playing career and the future of this sport. Even though she no longer appeared on the court as an athlete, Lisa still held an important position in the basketball ecosystem, where her voice and experience continued to have value in shaping perceptions of modern women's basketball. This transition did not erase her old identity, but expanded it into a new form of existence, where her legacy was not only created by actions on the court, but also by persistent contributions in nurturing and developing the next generation of American women's sports. Lisa Leslie continued her journey in the world of basketball, with a status that had far exceeded the framework of a competing athlete. When her contributions gradually received the highest recognition in sports history, culminating in being honored at the Basketball Hall of Fame, a recognition not only for her personal achievements, but also for the entire influence she had created on the development of women's basketball. That moment not only carried the meaning of honoring a long and successful career, but also marked Lisa Leslie officially becoming an inseparable part of world basketball history, where those inducted are not only outstanding athletes, but also those who have changed the way this sport is perceived. In that context, her career in the Los Angeles Sparks jersey and the national team was no longer evaluated only through statistics or titles, but also through the long-term impact she left on the structure and development of the WNBA, where she was one of the important factors contributing to shaping the initial image of the league. Lisa's legacy did not stop at the victories on the court, but expanded to the way she changed perceptions about female athletes in American society. When previously women's basketball was often undervalued, but through her presence and success, it gradually came to be recognized as an important part of professional sports. Her perseverance, discipline, and ability to maintain peak performance over many years helped her become a role model not only for her peers, but also for the younger generations pursuing a sports career, especially young girls who saw in Lisa a clear proof that limits are not fixed, but can be expanded through relentless effort. Her pioneering role in modern women's sports was not only shown through what she achieved, but also through her contribution to creating a foundation so that future generations of athletes could develop in a fairer and more recognized environment. What Lisa Leslie did was not limited to the United States, but was also recognized globally when her image became a symbol of progress in women's sports, representing a period when women's basketball began to be respected for its true value. This international recognition came not only from titles or competition moments, but also from the way she maintained a professional, stable, and positively influential image throughout her long career. Even though she no longer competed, Lisa continued to appear in basketball-related activities, playing the role of an inspirer and connector between the past and the future of this sport, where her legacy continued to be recalled and expanded through each new generation of athletes. Throughout that entire journey, Lisa Leslie was remembered not only as a champion, but also as someone who helped reshape the way the world perceives women's basketball, turning her career into a living part of modern sports history, where value lies not only in victory, but also in the long-term impact on an entire system. Lisa Leslie looked back on her entire journey not as a series of separate moments, but as a continuous flow starting from Compton and extending to the pinnacle of world sports, where each stage in her life was built on the foundation of perseverance, discipline, and the ability to endure pressure in increasingly harsh environments. From the early days growing up in a neighborhood with few opportunities, where basketball was just a small escape amid the great limitations of life, Lisa had step by step turned that into a career path spanning decades, taking her from school courts to NCAA, then WNBA and the United States national team. Throughout that journey, what was most special was not how many titles she achieved, but the way she maintained stability and perseverance in a sports environment that was always changing and highly competitive. With no major scandals or public collapses often seen in many famous athletes, Lisa's career was shaped by a form of silent sacrifice, where the pressures of physical, mental, and social responsibility always existed in parallel, but were rarely fully seen from the outside. She had to constantly balance between public expectations, team demands, and the natural limits of her body, while still maintaining stable competitive performance over many consecutive years at the highest level. This perseverance was not the result of a single explosive moment, but the accumulation of thousands of hours of training, hundreds of games, and countless times overcoming fatigue that only those involved could fully understand the extent of. As her career spanned many decades, Lisa gradually became a symbol not only of talent, but also of perseverance in women's sports, where she proved that success does not necessarily come with dramatic incidents, but can be built from stability, discipline, and the ability to maintain performance over a long period. In the context of professional sports that always set strict requirements for achievements and continuous innovation, Lisa's ability to maintain her position through many different generations of players showed a special kind of value. That is, the ability to adapt without losing personal identity. She not only existed in that system, but also helped shape it through her way of playing, her leadership, and her way of maintaining professionalism in every situation. When looking back, Lisa's career did not carry the image of a dramatic curve with clear peaks and collapses, but was like a continuous evolutionary process, where each stage naturally followed the previous one, creating a sustainable and consistent whole. It was this perseverance that made her one of the most representative models of modern women's sports, not because of shocking moments, but because of the ability to maintain value and performance throughout a long journey full of pressure. Lisa Leslie therefore was remembered not only as a champion, but also as a living proof that a sports career can be built not through short-term explosions, but through perseverance, stability, and the ability to endure over time, where every step contributes to creating a legacy that is not interrupted but continues to develop through each generation. Lisa Leslie stood at the end point of the long journey she had gone through, not as a simple athlete, but as a symbol that had been carved by time, discipline, and perseverance into a legacy that went beyond the framework of American women's basketball. From the early days growing up in Compton to becoming one of the most important figures in WNBA history, she had not only changed the way people perceived a female athlete, but also changed the way an entire sport defined limits, potential, and the role of women in professional sports. Lisa's legacy cannot be separated from the development of the WNBA, where she was one of the foundational factors helping the league not only survive but also develop into a global sports symbol. In the Los Angeles Sparks jersey, she did not just compete to win, but competed in a period when every action of hers contributed to shaping the future of the league, where each game carried the meaning of building public trust in professional women's basketball. Lisa's role in changing American sports lay not only in titles or historic moments, but also in her contribution to expanding space for women in sports, helping women's basketball become a more recognized and respected part of the national sports system. Over time, her influence was not limited to the basketball court, but also spread to the young generation of athletes. Those who looked at Lisa's journey as proof that perseverance and discipline can take a person from initial social limitations to the pinnacle of the sports world. For many young athletes, Lisa Leslie was not just a name in history, but the image of a path that could be taken, no matter how difficult the starting point. The meaning of her journey went far beyond statistics or trophies, because it reflected a process of overcoming social limits, where a girl from Compton could become a global symbol thanks to relentless perseverance. The recognition for Lisa came not only from the basketball community, but also from the broader society, where she was seen as a symbol of progress in women's sports. a person who helped change the way the world perceives the capabilities and roles of women in the highest competitive field. Even though she had stepped away from professional competition, Lisa's image continued to exist as a standard for professionalism, competitive spirit, and the ability to overcome adversity with perseverance. Ultimately, her legacy was not only created from brilliant moments on the court, but also from the entire long journey of discipline, perseverance, and responsibility, where a person had turned her own life into a living proof that sports is not only about victory, but also about the evolution of a human being through time. Looking back on Lisa Leslie's entire journey, people do not only see a women's basketball legend, but also see a life built from silent sacrifice and near absolute discipline. From her childhood days in Compton full of limited opportunities, where she had to grow up in an unstable economic environment and lacking female sports role models, Lisa had early on had to form her own path through basketball. Details such as her spending most of her childhood time on the basketball court instead of normal children's activities, or having to train in slight isolation when there was not much social companionship, show a childhood that was not easy but full of determination. When stepping into USC and then the WNBA with the Los Angeles Sparks, she not only faced competitive pressure, but also had to carry on her shoulders the expectations of an entire emerging generation of women's basketball, where each game carried meaning far beyond the individual. Even though she achieved historic accomplishments like the Olympics, WNBA titles, and becoming a symbol of American women's sports, what made her journey special was not only the glory, but the way she maintained perseverance through many decades without being broken by pressure or scandal, only with silent sacrifices in physical and personal life. The regret lies in the fact that behind the image of a strong symbol is a person who always had to balance between societal expectations and herself, where she was not allowed to show weakness in the eyes of the public, even though she was also a normal person with her own limits. From Lisa Leslie's story, the American people can draw a profound lesson that true success comes not only from talent or titles, but also from the ability to endure, persevere, and stay true to oneself under long-term pressures that few see. In modern society, where people often only see the external glamour, her story reminds us that behind every symbol is always a journey full of silent effort. And true greatness is built not in moments of victory, but in thousands of days that no one witnesses. If you feel the journey full of sacrifice and perseverance of Lisa Leslie, please hit subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next inspiring stories. Thank you for accompanying us, and see you again in the next video, where we will continue to explore the lives behind the sports spotlight.